Today on the Locked On Hornets podcast, you can hear the exact moment that my heart breaks. I replay my live stream of the NBA Draft Lottery today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
This is Locked On Hornets. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Thanks so much for making Locked On Hornets your first listen every day. We are free and daily wherever you get podcasts. That includes YouTube. I'm Doug Branson. You can catch more of my work over at everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm normally joined by my good friend Walker Mail, who is on WFNZ 12 to 3, and you can also listen to Hornets games there. So let's get into this show. I'm going to, in just a few moments, replay, for those that didn't watch it live, my stream that I did for Bleacher Report of the NBA Draft Lottery. And within that, you're going to hear my reaction to the Hornets. If you haven't heard by now, they dropped from the third best odds to get the number one overall pick to selecting not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but they dropped 3 spots all the way to 6th. And you're going to hear my reaction to that, and there's some draft analysis in there. It'll be a good time. And then Walker and I will get back together tomorrow and talk more about this. But I did see this headline on the Charlotte Observer that essentially was bad luck in the draft continues for the Charlotte Hornets as they drop from 3 to 6. And I just, before we hear this replay, I do have to pause, and I probably will bring this up with Walker tomorrow because I want to hear his thoughts on this. But, like, at some point, we have to recognize, like, that was a bummer. Going from 3 to 6 was a bummer. But at some point, we have to recognize that the Hornets jumped several spots to get to 3 to get LaMelo Ball, and they jumped 2 spots to get to 2 to get Brandon Miller. Now, yes, they missed out on the generational prospect in Wemby, but they really never had a shot. I mean, if you look at how this thing is selected and how they actually, it's not as if like, oh, because they got 2, they were so close to 1. It was that really the Washington Wizards had like 7 opportunities to get the number 1 pick, and they lost out on that on Wemby. So they were the really unlucky ones in that scenario. The Hornets just happened to get lucky and move to 2. So I think at some point we have to put away that and say, all right, that stunk. Like, I'd much rather stay at 3, would have loved to go to 1, but it's a weak draft. If you're going to strike out on a draft and move back several spots, I mean, let it be this draft. Honestly, I think they're, and also, they didn't even belong here, right? Like, the past 2 seasons, that's where the luck has been running out in terms of injuries. And so they shouldn't even be here right now. They shouldn't have any lottery pick. They should be competing for play-in and playoff spots over the past few years. That's been their goal. That's been what they've wanted to do. And so this idea that they're like unlucky in the draft, that's like old thinking. That's old Bobcats thinking that I think at some point, I don't know if it's the hiring of Charles Lee and all of his talk of competitiveness, but I'm fired up. And I'm ready to like cast off some of these negative thoughts and get into positive mode and get into competitive mode and see how this Hornets team can compete and win games into the future. So I just wanted to get that little fresh take out there for you before we hit 3 minutes on the microwave and go and listen to some of my analysis that you may have missed because you didn't watch it on the Bleacher Report app live. Okay. So, without further ado, let's get into some of that content. I'm Doug Branson from the Locked On Hornets podcast, streaming to you live here on the Bleacher Report app. Live streaming coverage of the Charlotte Hornets and their NBA Draft Lottery hopes and dreams. Hope is high in Charlotte right now as they've made a big coaching hire, getting Charles Lee off of the lead assistant role in Boston and into the slot as head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. So hope springs eternal as they've got LaMelo Ball hopefully coming back from injury. They've got Brandon Miller off a 3rd place Rookie of the Year campaign. And, had there not been 2 aliens slotted at 1-2, then, maybe he would have been Rookie of the Year. So And now they've got an opportunity here, third best odds in this draft lottery. They've got an opportunity to move to number one, have the best pick in a weak draft. Look, I'll take the best pick in any draft because that means you have the opportunity to add a super talent, and you've got the best odds of doing that. You're in the driver's seat there. It also opens up a lot of trade opportunities, which we can talk a little bit about as we get into it. Woj, Perk, we've got everybody on the stage now. Malika Andrews as well. NBA draft lottery. Here we go. I'm torn. I have mixed feelings about this as a fan of the Charlotte Hornets, right? Because there have been high highs. LaMelo Ball, you jump to third overall, reminiscent of jumping third overall and to get Baron Davis. And then the next year you jump again, number 2 overall. You get an opportunity to select Brandon Miller, and you do it, and he has a great year. And now could they go 3, then 2, then 1, and have an opportunity to draft maybe Alex Sarr, add another big to this roster who is crazy athletic, maybe Zachary Risachet. He's got a lot of ceiling as a two-way player, 6'10", big frame, could get bigger, strong perimeter player, 39% from three-point range. And or you go for like the safest pick in the draft. I don't know if you would do this number 1 overall, but you got Donovan Clingan as well from UConn, fresh off the championship, size, length, mobility, improved mobility at least, defense, playmaking. He's got a little bit of everything there too, and getting a lot of buzz on draft boards across the way. So if you're checking us out right now, make sure to hit the chat up. Let me know, comment, and let me know what you think of the Hornets, their position right now as they head into the draft lottery here. And I'm going to check on that chat. Still waiting on some chats coming in. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs up if you're here. Just topo, holler at me. Want to hear what you have to say. And where do the Hornets stand on lottery day? Well, they've got a new coach. They're young, but the records have been disappointing. The injuries have been mounting. And, they're looking forward. They've got a new ownership group in Rick Schnall, who is in attendance. He will be in the back as the representative in the place of, I believe, Mitch Kupchak. No. Buzz, the assistant GM. I can't get Buzz Aldrin's name out of or Buzz Lightyear. There are a lot of Buzzes, but that's not the Buzz that was representing the Hornets last year in the draft lottery. Buzz Peterson was that name, and so he was the assistant GM. Not sure on what that front office structure is now that Jeff Peterson is your GM now, but it's Rick Schnall there in Chicago. This is going to be a Schnall call. This is going to be Lottery Ball Schnall there for the Charlotte Hornets, and on stage will be last year's number 2 overall selection, Brandon Miller. And how do you feel? That's the question. How do you feel if they go? Obviously, you're going to be elated at 1-2 if you move up. How do you feel if you stay at 3? If you go down to 4 to 6, what's happening there? If you fall all the way to 7th, my God, that would be worst case scenario in a weak draft to fall all the way to 7th. 7th in this year's draft is like having something in the 20s in a normal draft. At least that's how everyone's making it out to be in terms of the scouting reports on these. Let me give you the sort of facts on what the odds are for the Hornets to move up or down. They've got a 13.3% shot at getting the number 1 overall selection. That falls to 12.9 when you look at the 2nd overall selection, 12.4 when you look at the 3rd overall selection, and then finally pick 4, 11.8%. The rest of those odds go like this: 15.3% shot at the 5th overall selection, 27.1% shot at the 6th overall selection, and the 7th, again, that's their floor. That's as far as they can fall, 7.4% shot that essentially 3 teams slide up in front of Charlotte. And, they're going to call this thing from 14 up. So we're going to see what happens there.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast, more of my analysis and reactions to what happened in yesterday's NBA draft lottery. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. That's million with an M. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. You can get in on all of the playoff action right now and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. That's all you need. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. PrizePicks has something for every sports fan, from basketball, hockey, League of Legends, everything in between. You can pick LeBron, Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, Jude Bellingham, all in the same entry. That's what makes PrizePicks so cool. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA, all lowercase, smushed together, LOCKEDONNBA, for a first deposit match up to $100. Download that app today, PrizePicks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. More Locked On Hornets ahead. As we prepare to watch this coverage, Alex Sarr in attendance, going to find out. You know, if you look at Gavoni and ESPN, that guy's got Risache as #1 overall selection. But more and more, I'm just seeing Sarr become this like developing consensus at the #1 overall selection. Donovan Clingan Clingan. He is in attendance. Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, the 2 Kentucky prospects, big offensive weapons. Reed Shepherd. You know, how much of a help can he be on the defensive end of the floor? Rob Dillingham, that would be a tough selection for the Hornets. You know, you added Trey Mann at the trade deadline, and you certainly want to look to beef up your guard position as much as possible, especially with the injury concerns to LaMelo Ball. But Dillingham, if your new head coach, Charles Lee, who is focused on defense, is kind of a defense-first coach, wants to build an identity there, it would be difficult to build that identity by selecting Dillingham 1st or 2nd overall, where you're going to pay that guy a lot of money and you're going to want to find a spot to play him in. Then, to me, the fit doesn't make so much sense there, right? Because, look, I mean, when you're talking about what Dillingham does well, creates shots off the bounce, very good shooter, but his size is a liability when it comes to the defensive end of the floor. So, you know, that's... If you're talking about like #1 thing that I think the Hornets should be addressing in this draft, it is continued size. They've been doing that, but continue to, get this team to look more like modern NBA teams where you've got, 6'9" wings everywhere, and defense. It's got to be a focus on the defensive end of the floor, where the Hornets have struggled even going back into the Borrego years, where they were a hot offensive team that gave LaMelo Ball full freedom to do everything that he wanted to do offensively, but defensively, the team struggled to be a problem on a night in and night out basis, and it led to some regular season success. But then when they got to play-in spots, it became difficult for the Hornets to really make an impact there. So, all right, we are cruising here as they are interviewing Donovan Clingan here, and we are getting closer to the NBA draft lottery reveal. We'll see how much coverage they do here. What would it mean for the Charlotte Hornets to get the #1 overall pick? Well, look, even in a weak draft, even in a draft where there's not a Wemby, LeBron, generational player at the #1 overall selection, there is a mystique, there is a cachet that comes with having the #1 overall pick in the NBA draft. And I think it would be amazing for the Hornets to have that flexibility when you talk about the fact that they've already added an additional first-round pick that's lightly protected via the Dallas Mavericks and that PJ Washington trade. You add to that the fact that they acquired another first-round pick with light protections on it from the Miami Heat. And both of those teams look to compete for a few years, so those protections will eventually drift away. When you add that to the fact that they haven't traded, they're not in a position where they're like the Clippers or some of these other teams or the Lakers that have traded like all of their assets, in the future. They've got plenty of future assets to all package together, make a 4-pick run at a big star. That #1 overall selection, you don't know if you're going to get back there again. So to me, that would be a strike while the iron is hot moment for the Charlotte Hornets to say, all right, we're going to take all of these things together and go after a Mikal Bridges, maybe an Anthony Davis. I don't know. I mean, you know, throw some names at the wall of some of these teams that are, maybe the Clippers want to reset. Maybe you bring back Brandon Miller's GOAT, greatest of all time, Paul George, and you pair him alongside Brandon Miller. I think when you start to talk about putting 4 or 5 picks together, then, you know, a lot opens up that wouldn't normally open up for a small to mid-sized market. And that's the playbook right now. That's a playbook that Indiana has used. That's certainly a playbook that Minnesota used to acquire Rudy Gobert. They went for it. Milwaukee to acquire Jrue Holiday. Now, they already had the generational all-star, all-NBA, MVP talent in Giannis, and, you know, they had that installed already. The Hornets don't have that. That move would be a lot less risky to make if you already have that player installed. But they don't. Now, they have potential ones in Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, but you don't have that surefire bet, as everyone here starting to take the stage, and the on-stage representative for the Charlotte Hornets is going to be Brandon Miller. They're just going to continue cascading that log. Mark Williams was the representative 1 year, so you've got that as well. So can they go 3? They've moved up to 3 in the past couple of years to get LaMelo Ball. Then they stayed where they were for Mark, and then do they go 2 for Brandon Miller and then go 1? We'll have to see. All right, if you're watching along, let me know in the chat. Hit me up in the chat. Questions, comments on Charles Lee. Just hired a new assistant coach. Looks like someone in the sort of player development realm from the Utah Jazz. Longtime Utah assistant under 2 regimes there in Utah. So these player development guys, they tend to kind of stick around because you're not, you know, you're someone that you want to. There's going to be inconsistency in head coach and assistant coach's staff, but you want some consistency when you're talking about player development staff. So Lamar Skeeter looks like he's coming over from Utah to Charlotte. If you have any questions, comments on that, where's the hope level right now? The hope is the sickness. On Locked On Hornets podcast, we call the fan, we call ourselves and the fans of this team the sickos, because at this point, you know, to continue to believe that the Charlotte Hornets are going to win a playoff series, despite the fact that they have not won a playoff series in over 3 presidential administrations, the age of the amount of time that the Hornets have spent not winning a playoff series, it could legally drink in the United States. It is over 21 years old. They haven't been to a playoff series since 2016, that Kemba, Nick Batum, Jeremy Lin, Al Jefferson season. They went to 2 play-in games a few years ago, 2 straight, and got absolutely housed in both of those, blown out. So if you still hold on to the hope, then there has to be some level of illness going on inside of you. And so you're a sicko, and the sicko level is high right now, as even though you have the 3rd best overall odds at the number 1 overall pick, I think there's still a layer of Hornets fans that look at this team and say, we're just one step away. We're just one thing away from getting back into contention. And we'll have to see. Look, I've got all of the Lucky Charms going on. A lot of them are sitting on the wall. You've got a LaMelo Ball Rookie of the Year bobblehead. You've got a Beanie Baby, Eldon Campbell Beanie Baby that I got in the last ever regular season home game of the first run of the Charlotte Hornets. I've got my draft cap on. I've got a shirt that I wore when my baby was born and when the Hornets last moved up in the lottery, when they moved to number 2. So close to getting Wemby, but they moved to number 2 overall when they had the 4th best odds, and were able to select Brandon Miller, and that has really worked out for the Charlotte Hornets. And so this is, this shirt's got a lot of luck involved, and you can see if you look, if you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching this on the Bleacher Report live stream here, then you can see that I'm also like burning some kind of tea tree incense here. I'm doing everything I can. I want to do my part to get this moving for the Charlotte Hornets to acquire another asset. It's all about assets, baby. We're talking assets here as the Hornets are trying to move up. And I don't want to hear anything about the Golden State Warriors having a 0.7%, Sacramento 0.8%, Chicago 2%. If one of those teams jumps up and gets that number 1 overall selection, I'll riot. I will riot here on the air. And, because look, there's a lot of misery at the top of this list when you're talking about the Wizards, the Hornets. The Trailblazers have had some recent success. Now they're going through all of the representative. Brandon Pajemski, last year's pick for the Warriors. He's there on the dais for them. For Sacramento, it's Keegan Murray. So a lot of people going with the most recent, some of the most recent draft picks. Ime Udoka, bold pick for the Houston Rockets after all the controversy. Stick the head coach up there. Why not? Julian Phillips, Bulls forward, is your representative for Chicago. Landry Fields, the general manager of the Atlanta Hawks. Rick Schnall's former team, the owner of the Charlotte Hornets. Thurl Bailey, the broadcaster for the Utah Jazz, is your representative for the Jazz. They go with the broadcaster. I'd love to see Eric Collins up there, by the way, for the Hornets. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, because if they get it and he's got to stand on stage, if they do that whole thing, I mean, could you imagine the reaction? You got to give him a microphone at that point. Could you imagine the interview if they had Eric Collins on there? That would be amazing. Scotty Barnes, your Toronto representative, the future of that franchise sitting on the dais. Dais, I love that word. One of my favorite words. Absolutely.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast, my final bit of analysis and reactions to yesterday's NBA draft lottery. But before we do that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets and with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You could bet on the NBA 2024 number 1 overall pick. That's sort of the theme of this episode, NBA draft lottery. Alex Sarr is the consensus favorite here at minus 190. Zachary Risache at plus 290 to go number 1 overall. So, I mean, he's not an overwhelming favorite at, I think, at minus 190. Certainly some movement there could happen with Risache, Topic, Klingon. Like, if you take, they have 6 players here listed. So if you want to take this as a possible, like, FanDuel mock draft, then the Charlotte Hornets at 6th would be selecting Reed Sheppard from Kentucky. I wouldn't mind that. I'm kind of coming around on the idea at 6. I'm coming around on the idea of Reed Sheppard dropping there. He is at plus 3,100 to go number 1 overall. You can also bet where Bronny James gets drafted. You think the Hornets maybe they pull a zag? You think Schnall, burnt by the NBA draft lottery, decides forget it? We're finding a way to take Bronny and we're bringing LeBron James to Charlotte. We'll see. All right, back to FanDuel and this amazing offer. You get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's number 1 sportsbook. More Locked On Hornets ahead. So, look, Detroit's, if you're talking about misery level, I would say my only advocacy for the Hornets on the misery level is that they have had talent on this team for the past couple of seasons, and it has gone very south for this team because of injuries, multiple injuries. One of their rock-solid all-star level players, he's made an all-star game in LaMelo Ball. His whole career is uncertain at this point. And here we go. Looks like we're about to get this thing kicked off as Mark Tatum approaches to start this thing. Quick happy Mother's Day. It doesn't get nerve-wracking until we get to 7. So 14. Portland gets the 14th pick, but that was expected via Golden State. That was their 0.8% chance. All right, Sacramento, everything. Yeah, let me pull up. I need to pull up the odds here as we go through this. 14 overall. All right, OKC, that's expected. They get the pick from Houston, so we're still rolling along. And again, nothing matters for the Hornets until we get to 7. Now, if one of these teams doesn't show up, then we know somebody's jumped, but no. Wow. So 2 teams have jumped into the top 4. That's not great news for the Charlotte Hornets, because if they're not one of the teams that remained in the top 4, they are moving down 2 spots. Here we go. San Antonio gets 8, and the moment for the Charlotte Hornets now it gets super nerve-wracking because you've got 2 teams that have already jumped. Number 7. This is the worst the Hornets could do at this point. All right, so Portland falls to 7. So that's not great news for the Hornets either, because now you've got 3 teams that have jumped in. Unless Charlotte Hornets drop to 6th. Oh, that's a heartbreaker. I mean, they really, there was only one spot worse that they could be. 3 teams. Detroit had the number 1 overall selection. They're dropping to 5th. Washington remains in line for a number 1 overall selection. The Hornets dropped 2 spots to 6th. That is brutal, folks. Now, so let's talk about it as we'll continue to kind of monitor this, but the Hornets' fate is decided. So let's talk about this. Hornets fall to 6th. We can go to the Ringer mock draft right now. They've got Cody Williams in the 6th slot, who would be a defensive player. Let's talk about some of the players you're going to miss out on at 6. Definitely going to miss out on Sarr. Klingen, unless you move up, that looks like it's probably less of a possibility. Nikola Topic at 3 overall. Buzelis, 4th overall in Kevin O'Connor's mock draft. Rob Dillingham, and some other guys could jump up there. Ron Holland, Stephon Castle, who's been a guy that we've liked a lot. That could suddenly be a player that could be in your range because it looked like, if you were going to get 1, 2, or 3, that probably wasn't going to be Castle. But now the Hornets could take a fresh look if they want to make this pick. But let's talk about what this means. Look, if they had gotten the number 1 overall selection or even a top 3 selection, I think it would have made that pick a lot more valuable to package either on its own, just to move back into the draft and acquire some more assets to make a run at a player next season. But certainly this is disappointing because now I think you're either looking at, maybe moving back, but again, in a weak draft, I don't know that maybe somebody falls in love with somebody and the Hornets have an opportunity, but I don't think it's going to come with the package coming back. I don't think is going to be super strong in terms of maybe another future first round pick or something like that. If this were a stronger draft, you could make a case for that. So then I think you really are kind of scouting out the future at this point. Is there someone at 6th that would make sense to add and have make an immediate contribution on this team? I do think that Castle is one of those players. I mean, strong defensive capabilities. He's a decently clutch outside shooter. He put that on display for UConn. He's got to improve as a scorer. The shooting, I think, that's going to be the big question mark. Do you draft the shooting guard that can't shoot? In clutch moments, he was able to turn it up. But when you look at the overall efficiency numbers and the outside shooting numbers for Stephon Castle, there are a lot of question marks there. So does he make it happen there? We'll have to see. But yeah, so you're going to miss out on Risa Shea. You're going to miss out on Sarr, Klingen again, unless you move up. But I would say the likelihood of the Charlotte Hornets using assets to move up in a weak draft, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. And I think the people that they've hired are smart people, generally Jeff Peterson. And, you've got 2 people at the helm on the ownership group in Gabe Plotkin and Rick Schnall, who showed some savvy at the trade deadline. They know what they're doing. They know what constitutes good team building and bad team building. And they've been pretty on record with wanting to be steady as she goes and build a sustained winner and not make crazy moves. So we'll see. We'll hold them to that and see if that's how they actually approach this draft. But yeah, so now at 6th overall, you are sitting almost smack dead in the middle of the NBA draft lottery, and we'll have to see here if there are any guys that move up. If a Tristan Da Silva would be interesting if you wanted to add another 7-footer, if you wanted to get center, because if you're talking about draft needs for the Charlotte Hornets, I think it starts with more big depth and more defensive guard depth. I generally think that in terms of small forward, power forward, you could add some defense there for sure, but you're generally deep there. I think that guard depth and center depth, your top and bottom of your roster, really have to get addressed, particularly with LaMelo Ball's injury history, particularly with Mark Williams and that back injury that he sustained that kept him out of most of the season, only played in 19 games. Is he going to be 100% healthy? And even if he is 100% healthy, if he doesn't develop a jump shot, then you're talking about a guy who sort of ceilings out as a role player. You're still going to be eventually looking for that starter, that can help you go 5 out. So is there that help in this draft? A big who either already is a good shooter or prospects as that. You could go and search for that either. That's not, obviously that's not Zach Edey, immense size and strength, but the shooting talent isn't there. All right, San Antonio, at least they didn't get the first overall pick again. I mean, goodness, if that had happened, So the Rockets get the 3rd pick. So Washington, one of the only of the original top 4 overall. So it's Atlanta, and Washington gets 2nd, meaning Atlanta is going to be the number 1 overall, is going to have the number 1 overall pick. So Rick Schnall, the new owner of the Charlotte Hornets, former owner of the Atlanta Hawks, he has to be in the back and watch his former team celebrate getting the number 1 overall selection as they do the cutaway to Alex Sarr. Is he going to be the number 1 overall selection? That will be interesting to watch as well. So again, the Hornets, they have a lot to be hopeful for. I think this, I'm sure people, you're watching right now, you're listening right now, you're disappointed. You have every right to be. The Hornets, again, even though they have moved up in recent drafts, they moved up to 3rd overall to get LaMelo Ball. They've moved up in the past couple of years to 2nd overall. So maybe some would say, hey, don't be ungrateful. You've moved up. You've had some lottery luck. Don't worry about it. You had 2 first-round picks in the Mark Williams draft. You traded one of those first-round picks to have a worse first-round pick. So you got no right. But I would say you do have a right because this Hornets team has been devastated by injuries for the past 2 seasons and really only matched by Memphis this season. But they have not had a full complement of their roster, and they trying to do the right things. New ownership seems to be moving this thing in the right direction. Now you've got a good head coach in Charles Lee and Jeff Peterson as the GM will have a new, fresh, creative, young direction for this team. But they've still got to improve this roster. How does that 6th pick factor into that? Is it, we're going to draft somebody that can help us now? Castle, maybe Cody Williams? Or is it going to be a situation where you go out and you package that for a veteran? Those will be the big question marks for the Charlotte Hornets. Again, tough luck for the Charlotte Hornets, who had the 3rd best odds, were looking to move up. Instead, they moved back 3 slots and move back to 6. That's tough. I mean, that is tough. So, all right, that's going to do it for this stream. You can check more of my work out if it's the first time you're ever seeing my face. Hi, how you doing? Sorry I couldn't bring more luck. I'm going to burn this shirt. I'm going to take this hat and toss it into a trash can. But I'm sorry I couldn't bring more luck. But if you want more of my analysis of the NBA draft, you can also catch my co-host Walker Mail of ESPN of WFNZ. I did this twice now. Just in this past 2 weeks that I've given his former call letters and not his current. He is on WFNZ 12 to 3. Walker Mail. He is my co-host. And he will join me again next week to talk more about this and some of the coaching moves on the Locked On Hornets podcast, which airs every single day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Every weekday, we are on for 30 minutes talking about the Charlotte Hornets. If you are finding yourself more hopeful after the addition of Charles Lee installed as head coach, if you find yourself wanting more of that, then you should subscribe to the Locked On Hornets podcast. All right, folks. Thanks for joining me here live on Bleacher Report. Thank you to Bleacher Report for inviting me, and hope to see you all on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Until then, go Hornets, go America. Let's swarm Charlotte.